Welcome to our Policy Chat webinar, where James and I invite a special guest to chat about various issues. We hope you saw our first chat webinar on mental health with David Shillington, our Queensland State Manager and ex-NRL superstar. Our guest this time is Michelle Golafshan, a Consult Australia board member, General Counsel at Douglas Partners, and a participant in our Liability and Contracts Roundtable. So really a Consult Australia superstar. Today we'll be talking contracts, which Michelle and I could probably talk about for days. So thankfully James is here to pull us out of any legal spirals.
Yes, so I'll let you know if it's getting a bit too legalese for me to understand. But I do think it's an important topic. It's an important time to talk about contracts, given they are what feeds us as an industry. And due to some challenges in this space from COVID-19 and also historically. Aspects of today's discussion that are relevant to all of our member firms are what COVID-19 revealed about contracts and what momentum can we use for change. So we'll use both of these questions as the focus for today's conversation. We'll start with Michelle. Firstly, welcome. And secondly, what has COVID-19 revealed about the world of contracts to you?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me on as a guest to talk about contracts. I think it's a topic we all pretend is not our favourite, but then it always dials up a bit of passion. So I'm looking forward to getting stuck in. So James, you asked what COVID-19 revealed about contracts in our space. I think it revealed a lot, or at least particularly in the early stages of the pandemic, it put the spotlight onto some parts of contracts that never really got much attention before, like the old force majeure clause. Due to the threats of lockdown and workforce transmission of COVID-19, we initially saw a flurry of concern about force majeure clauses and also extensions of time and variation clauses. But gratefully for our industry, at least we've been able to continue operating and delivering for the most part. And then we saw some government clients try to manage COVID-19 impacts through variations, from generous time and cost variations to some not so great examples of requiring COVID-19 risks to be priced at tender, which of course is an incredibly tricky thing to attempt. And of course, payment terms also came to the fore, with cash flow being a key priority for businesses everywhere. On a related note, I must say thanks to Consult Australia for playing a big part in liaising with government and industry throughout this time on these critical issues, and also for producing some very useful guidance papers on contracts and COVID-19. If any of our members haven't already downloaded them, I do recommend checking them out on the Consult Australia website.
Yeah, I certainly got a fast lesson in force majeure, having not dealt with those clauses before. But I think the thing that I think I learned by looking at the AS412 contract, the Consult Australia contract, and then various government contracts is that flexibility is the key. The more you try to anticipate all the what ifs, the harder it is for parties to actually come together, explore new ideas, explore new issues, and then resolve those issues. And this is probably why we decided that we didn't need a force majeure clause in the Consult Australia contract. When it was drafted, we didn't put one in, and we had a little bit of a review due to COVID-19. But I think our variation clause is really flexible, and it covers a lot of the instances that happened, covers legislative change, and of course all those public health orders that restricted movement, social distancing, etc. It was all legislative based.
This is what I've heard about a bit before, about contracts facilitating communication rather than, I guess, dictating the how and the why. So Michelle, is this what we mean by collaborative contracting?
Yeah, exactly. The idea behind collaborative contracts is to give all parties the incentive to collaborate with each other and see a project succeed. There are certain types of collaborative contract models like NEC, early contractor involvement and alliance agreements, and they're all structured quite differently to conventional contracts in that they focus more on joint problem solving at an early stage as opposed to liability allocation after the fact. And we've recently seen a more positive movement towards collaborative contracting models. For example, Sydney Water has become the first organisation in Australia to adopt the NEC4 contract suite at the organisational level. So we should be seeing more collaborative contracts coming out of our clients. But what I really think matters is the principle behind all of these collaborative contracting models, which I think can actually be applied to any contractual document. I don't think a contract should really be about all the ways we can pin each other for something going wrong on a project. Because what we know in practice is that this type of contract and indeed relationship tends to result in more conservative outputs, higher costs, more claims, higher PI premiums, which we all know about, and at times an us versus them mentality, which isn't very helpful for anyone. I think clients and consultants have the opportunity within the way we contract with each other now to look properly at the risks that we're allocating and the risks that we're taking on, and ask, of course, the fundamental question, who can actually control this risk? Because we all know that nipping a potential issue in the bud is the best way of making it go away. So having the ability as a consultant, as a necessary part of the team, collaborate with your client on solving potential problems without the fear of ultimate blame drives better project outcomes.
Interesting point. I guess that leads well into what momentum we can think can harness change to contracting, which also leads us well to what's happening in the government activity space for Consult Australia. Chrissy, any updates from your end?
Oh yeah, we've certainly had some great conversations around the country on collaborative contracting and how we can use this opportunity to cement those ideals that Michelle just talked about there, and how we can really reform contracting to make sure that we can realise the economic recovery from COVID-19. I hope that our members have all provided us best practice examples, which we've asked for on procurement. I've certainly used the ones that have come through in discussions with various agencies to really spark a rethink of contracting models, and showing that it's not an invention test. It's happened before in past projects. It's about putting all those best case examples together, and really what's come out of those best practice examples is collaboration, communication, transparency. Probably not a surprise. We've also had great support from the Small Business Ombudsman, as well as the ACCC, on how bad contracting could really impact our recovery.
Yeah, so we recently had the Deputy Chair of the ACCC, Mick Keogh, speak to some of the senior leaders of the Consult Australia membership, and we had a really good discussion about unfair contracting and the potential avenues that are open to us at the moment to get some real change in competition and consumer law, so that rather than us all chipping away at each and every client contract that contains some of these unfair terms, the legislation might prohibit them in some way by recognising what is essentially an imbalance of power issue that exists between clients and consultants of all sizes. At the moment, some of the Consult Australia membership, particularly the SMEs, might be able to take advantage of the existing unfair contract regime, but due to the lower thresholds for triggering that regime, and also the fact that government procurement contracts are largely exempt from competition and consumer law, much of our industry isn't able to take advantage of the protections that exist in the Competition and Consumer Act. So Mick Keogh acknowledged the very real impact that onerous contracts have on competition in the economy. And we talked about the impacts COVID-19 has on competitions and margins in our industry. Based on the recent pulse survey of Consult Australia's members, 56% of members are anticipating that competition will get tighter in the next 6 months in our industry, which isn't really surprising. Some of the examples of unfair contract terms that we gave to the ACCC include contracting out of proportionate liability, unreasonable head contract pass downs, unlimited liability, which of course has a significant impact on the PI issues we're all facing at the moment. But on a positive note, there is some reform in the pipeline on unfair contract term protections, which Consult Australia has made a submission on the industry's behalf. There's a proposal to increase the threshold for triggering the regime up to $10 million, which would give a lot more protection to the projects that are going on. So there's also a recommendation by the ACCC on creating an unfair practices regime, which might better catch some of the imbalance of power issues that we see in contracts.
And clearly improvements in contracting behaviours are tied with ensuring that any government stimulus in the pipeline of projects can also be realised, which is an area that I've been focused on recently. I believe there's a strong argument that a healthy pipeline creates a good environment to improve procurement practices. So we recently released a policy briefing with governments on the benefits from additional investments in the pipeline of projects to support Australia's economic recovery from COVID-19. So firstly, we are encouraging governments to help respond to downturns we've seen in recent months. We've seen a big drop off in private sector investments, particularly in the building space. So this is a great opportunity for governments to create some more business confidence in our market and look at how these skills can be used to support some government objectives as well. Social infrastructure is a big one. It also helps address concerns about a thin pipeline in 6 to 12 months. We've consistently heard this feedback from member firms. So we should acknowledge that tighter competition can also have negative impacts in the contract space as well. We also make the point in our policy briefing that the value of stimulus is not what you spent, it's the outcome delivered. So governments should focus on how they can maximise economic and social benefits from investments. So I believe this is a very similar point to getting better value from better procurement practices, which is why from a pipeline perspective, we're encouraging governments to take a business case-led response and look at some of the areas of the market that are not performing to their capacity to help inform some investment decisions. So a copy of this policy briefing will be up on our soon-to-be launched website. So I encourage you to check that out when you can.
That's great, James. Very important that we sort of link those pipeline and procurement issues together because, you know, they feed into one and the other, and productivity really is the key there. So that really brings us to the end of our discussion on contract terms. James, how did you go? You didn't get too lost?
No, very interesting discussion. As you mentioned, I think there's a really strong link between procurement and other challenges that we experience as an industry around the pipeline and skills. The Prime Minister delivered a speech last week on infrastructure and how this can be a key driver for Australia's economic recovery. And in that speech, he talked about Australia's growth over the coming years needing to be above trend for us to return to pre-COVID forecasts, which simply requires an increase in productivity. So I think there are some really clear opportunities in this space to help unlock some productivity wins around procurement. If we couple this with a smarter pipeline, a renewed focus on the skills of the future and what sort of skills are going to deliver good value, I think we can get our industry really humming along in this new normal world. This will help us ensure that our industry as a whole is helping drive Australia's economic recovery. Michelle, any final observations from your end?
Yeah, I think what's been really interesting about looking at COVID-19 from a crisis perspective is that we've really seen how collaboration has been the key to solving issues of all kinds and at the speed with which the crisis demanded it. So I think we can see just how powerful it is to drive collaboration through our contract.
Yeah, and the thing that I keep coming back to is really a contract is just a tool. Tool is used by humans, and, you know, human relationships are the key, right? That's how you get the collaboration. Yeah. Okay, very big thanks to our special guest, Michelle.
Pleasure.
We hope to bring you members another web chat in around 6 weeks' time. If you've got any ideas on a future topic or guest, please email us at info@consultaustralia.com.au. Thank you.
Thanks.